May ate in silence. Jared asked for seconds, but there weren't any. When they got up, I started clearing the table while Dad sat there sipping his tea. He had paint in his hair again, a smattering of yellow that made me smile. He stood, brushing crumbs off his shirt. "Sorry, Dad," I murmured as I picked up the plates. "Don't be silly, kitten. I'm not mad." He smiled easily and put an arm around me. You don't have to explain it to me. Honey, I know." He kissed me on my forehead. "I'm going back to work." And with that, I moved to the kitchen to start cleaning. I wrapped my mostly untouched plate under a napkin and hid it in the fridge. No one else left more than crumbs. I sighed, heading to my room to get ready for bed. The whole thing was infuriating. Why did Mom have to push me so much? Wasn't she happy? Didn't she love Dad? Why wasn't this good enough for her? I lay on my lumpy mattress trying to wrap my head around the selection. I guess it had its advantages. It would be nice to eat well for a while at least. But there was no reason to bother. I wasn't going to fall in love with Prince Maxim. From what I'd seen on the Ilia Capital report, I wouldn't even like the guy. It seemed like forever until midnight rolled around. There was a good mirror by my door, and I stopped to make sure my hair looked as good as it had this morning and put on a little lip gloss so there'd be some color on my face. Mom was pretty strict about saving makeup for when we had to perform or go out in public, but I usually snuck some on nights like tonight. As quietly as I could, I crept into the kitchen. I grabbed my leftovers, some bread that was expiring, and an apple and bundled it all up. It was painful to walk back to my room so slowly, now that it was late, but if I'd done it earlier, I would have just been antsy. I opened my window and looked out into our little patch of backyard. There wasn't much of a moon out, so I had to let my eyes adjust before I moved. Across the lawn, the treehouse stood barely silhouetted in the night. When we were younger, Koda would tie up sheets to the branches so it looked like a ship. He was the captain, and I was always his first mate. My duties mainly consisted of sweeping the floor and making food, which was dirt and twigs stuffed into Mom's baking pans. He'd take a spoonful of dirt and eat it by throwing it over his shoulder. This meant that I'd have to sweep again, but I didn't mind. I was just happy to be on the ship with Koda. I looked around. All the neighboring houses were dark. No one was watching. I crawled out of my window carefully. I used to get bruises across my stomach from doing it the wrong way, but now it was easy, a talent I'd mastered over the years, and I didn't want to mess up any of the food. I scurried across the lawn in my cutest pajamas. I could have left my day clothes on, but this felt better. I suppose it didn't matter what I wore, but I felt pretty in my little brown shorts and fitted white shirt. It wasn't hard anymore to scale the slats into the tree with only one hand. I developed that skill as well. Each step up was a relief. It wasn't much of a distance, but from here it felt like all the commotion from my house was miles away. Here I didn't have to be anyone's princess. As I climbed into the tiny box that was my escape, I knew I wasn't alone. In the far corner someone was hiding in the night. My breath sped. I couldn't help it. I set my food down and squinted. The person shifted, lighting an all but unusable candle. It wasn't much light. No one in the house would see it, but it was enough. Finally the intruder spoke, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Hey there, gorgeous." Chapter 2. I crawled deeper into the treehouse. It wasn't much more than a 5-by-5-foot cube. Even Jared couldn't stand up straight in here, but I loved it. There was one opening to crawl into, and then a tiny window on the opposite wall. I'd placed an old step stool in the corner to act as a desk for the candle, and a little rug that was so old it was barely better than sitting on the slats. It wasn't much, but it was my haven, our haven. Please don't call me gorgeous. First my mom, then May, now you. It's getting on my nerves. By the way Aspen was looking at me, I could tell I wasn't helping my "I'm not pretty" case. He smiled. "I can't help it. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You can't hold it against me for saying it the only time I'm allowed to." He reached up and cupped my face, and I looked deep into his eyes. That was all it took. His lips were on mine, and I couldn't think about anything anymore. There was no selection, no miserable family, no Ilya itself. There were only Aspen's hands on my back, pulling me closer. Aspen's breath on my cheeks. My fingers went to his black hair, still wet from his shower. He always took showers at night and tangled themselves into perfect little knots. He smelled like his mother's homemade soap. I dreamed about that smell. We broke apart, and I couldn't help but smile. His legs were propped open wide, so I sat sideways between them, like a little kid who needed cradling. Sorry, I'm not in a better mood. It's just that we got this stupid notice in the post today. Ah, yes, the letter, Aspen sighed. We got two. Of course, the twins had just turned 16. Aspen studied my face as he spoke. He did that when we were together, like he was recommitting my face to memory. It had been over a week, and we both got anxious when it was more than a few days. And I looked him over too. No caste excluded, Aspen was by far the most attractive guy in town. He had dark hair and green eyes, and this smile that made you think he had a secret. He was tall, but not too tall, thin, but not too thin. I noticed in the dim light that there were tiny bags under his eyes. No doubt he'd been working late all week. His black t-shirt was worn to threads in several places, just like the shabby pair of jeans he wore almost every day. If only I could sit and patch them up for him. That was my great ambition, not to be Ilya's princess, to be Aspen's. It hurt me to be away from him. Some days I went crazy wondering what he was doing, and when I couldn't handle it, I practiced music. I really had Aspen to thank for me being the musician that I was. He drove me to distraction, and that was bad. Aspen was a 6. 6s were servants, and only a step up from the 7s in that they were better educated and trained for indoor work. Aspen was smarter than anyone knew and devastatingly handsome, but it was atypical for a woman to marry down. A man from a lower caste could ask for your hand, but it was rare to get a yes. And when anyone was married into a different caste, they had to fill out paperwork and wait for something like 90 days before any other legal things that you needed could be done. I'd heard more than one person say it was to people give a chance to change their minds. So us being this personal and out well past Ilya's curfew, we could both get in serious trouble, not to mention the hell that I'd get from my mother. But I loved Aspen. I loved Aspen for nearly 2 years, and he loved me. As he sat there stroking my hair, I couldn't imagine entering the selection. How do you feel about it, the selection, I asked. Okay, I guess. He's got to find a girl somehow, poor guy. I could hear the sarcasm, but I really wanted to know his opinion. Aspen. Okay. Well, part of me thinks it's kind of sad. Doesn't the prince date? Can he seriously not get anyone? And then try to wed the princesses to other princes? Why don't they do the same for him? There's got to be some royal out there good enough for him. I don't get it, so there's that. But then he sighed. Part of me thinks it's a good idea. It's exciting. He's going to fall in love in front of everyone. And I like that someone gets a happily ever after and all that. Anybody could be our next queen. It's kind of hopeful. It makes me think that I could have a happily ever after, too. His fingers were tracing my lips. Those green eyes searched deep into my soul, and I felt that spark of connection that I'd only ever had with him. I wanted our happily ever after, too. So you're encouraging the twins to enter, then? I asked. Yes. We've all seen the prince from time to time. He looks like a nice enough guy. A snot, no doubt, but friendly. And the girls are so eager, it's funny to watch. They were dancing in the house when I came home today, and no one can deny that it'd be good for the family. Mom's hopeful because we have 2 entries from the house instead of 1. That was the first good news about this horrible competition. I couldn't believe I'd been so self-absorbed that I hadn't thought about Aspen's sisters. If one of them went, if one of them won. Aspen, do you realize what that would mean? If Camber or Celia won? He closed his hold tighter around me, his lips brushing my forehead. One hand moved up and down my back. That's all I've thought about today, he said, the gritty sound of his voice pushed out every other thought. All I wanted was for Aspen to touch me, kiss me, and that's exactly where the night would have gone, but his stomach growled and snapped me out of it. "Oh, hey, I brought us a snack," I said lightly. "Oh, yeah?" I could tell that he was trying not to sound excited, but some of his eagerness came through. "You'll love this chicken. I made it." I found my little bundle and brought it to Aspen, who, to his merit, nibbled it all slowly, took one bite of the apple so that he would feel like it was for us, but then I set it down and let him have the rest. Where meals were a worry at my house, they were a disaster at Aspen's. He had much steadier work than we did, but got paid significantly less. There was never enough food for his family. He was the oldest of 7, and in the same way I'd stepped up to help as soon as I could, Aspen had stepped aside. He'd passed his share of the little food they had down to his siblings and to his mom, who was always tired from working. His dad had died 3 years ago, and Aspen's family depended on him for almost everything. I watched with satisfaction as he licked the spices from the chicken off his fingers and tore into the bread. I couldn't imagine when he'd eaten last. "You're such a good cook, you're going to make someone very fat and happy one day," he said, his mouth half full with a bite of apple. "I'm going to make you fat and happy, you know that." Ah, to be fat. We laughed, and he told me about life since the last time I'd seen him. He'd done some clerical work for one of the factories, and it was going to carry him through the next week, too. His mom had finally gotten into a routine of house cleaning for a few of the 2s in our area. The twins were both sad because their mom had made them drop their after-school drama club so that they could work more. "I'm going to see if I can pick up some work on Sundays, make a little more money. I hate for them to give up something they love so much," he said with hope. Like you really could do it. "Aspen Leaker, don't you dare. You work too hard as it is." "Ah, Mare," he whispered into my ear. It gave me chill bumps. "You know how Camber and Celia are. They need to be around people. They can't be cooped up cleaning and writing all the time. It's just not in their nature." "But it's not fair for them to expect you to do it all, Aspen. I know exactly how you feel about your sisters, but you need to watch out for yourself. If you really love them, you'll take better care of their caregiver. Don't you worry about a thing, Mare. I think there are some good things on the horizon. I wouldn't be doing it forever." But he would, because his family would always need money. "Aspen, I know you could do it, but you're not the superhero. You can't expect to be able to provide everything for everyone you love. You just can't do everything." We were quiet for a moment. I hoped he was taking my words to heart, realizing that if he didn't slow down, he'd wear himself out. It wasn't anything new for a 6, 7, or 8 to just die of exhaustion. I couldn't bear that. I pressed myself even closer to his chest, trying to get the image out of my head. "America?" "Yes," I whispered. "Are you going to enter the selection?" "No, of course not. I don't want anyone to think I'd even consider marrying some stranger. I love you," I said earnestly. "You want to be a 6? Always hungry? Always worried?" he asked. I could hear the pain in his voice, but also the genuine question. If I had to choose between sleeping in a palace with people waiting on me or the 3-room apartment with Aspen's family, which one did I really want? Aspen will make it. We're smart. We'll be fine. I willed it to be true. "You know that's not how it'll be, Mare. I'd still have to support my family. I'm not the abandoning type." I squirmed a little in his arms. "And if we had kids, when we have kids, and we'll just be careful about it. Who says we have to have more than 2? You know that's not something we can control." I could hear the anger building in his voice. I couldn't blame him. If you were wealthy enough, you could regulate having a family. If you were a 4 or worse, they left you to fend for yourself. This had to be the subject of many an argument for us over the last 6 months, when we seriously started trying to find a way to be together. Children were the wild card. The more you had, the more there were to work, but then again, so many hungry mouths.